And we are now live. Welcome, everybody, to the latest edition of the Page Black Business Leaders Series. And this one is on how to make hard decisions. And so when I'm talking to you about what I mean when I say making a hard decision, I'm not talking about if you have two people to hire and you're picking between two great candidates and it's difficult. Like, yes, that's a hard decision, but that's not the kind of discussion we're having today. We're really here to talk about the hard decisions that start off with a panic attack when you realize you have to make that decision. When it's 30 minutes of like your heart's beating fast, you're sweating, you're like, oh my gosh, this is a big deal. And it's going to be this decision, the consequences of the decision are life altering. And you need to make the right decision. Or maybe you go out of business, maybe you have a divorce with a business partner, or maybe you have to fire someone, or you have to fire a client, all those things where they come. So that is the discussion for today. But as we get started, I want to introduce my two panelists today. My third panelist, unfortunately, had a medical thing come up and can't make it. So we are blessed here to have Don Scott. And Don Scott is a business leadership coach. He was an Arthur Andersen partner and built and ran a $1 billion trust company operation. He was a COO and a CFO of an oil company. And he combines 35 years of business experience with a master's degree in psychology. And there's not very many people that do both of those. And very, very few people that can do both of those with the background. And he got that degree at the University of Santa Monica. My second guest is Rick Bailey. Rick D. Bailey, owner of the law office of Rick D. Bailey. Rick's a trial lawyer and mediator, and he handles complex business disputes. And whose advice do you want to have when you're making a difficult decision? Is a high-end business coach and a high-end business attorney. So we have no complaints today on that. He was previously a litigation partner in large law firms in Chicago and Denver. He was the SVP of Federal Government Affairs for the AT&T Corp in DC and general counsel for AT&T Broadband. So he's handled many different kinds of disputes. In fact, he's one of my go-to people when I have, I'm feeling like, gosh, this is a big deal and I'm stuck. He's one of my go-to people that I go talk to, and I'm lucky to have him in my network. So as we go forward, I'll just briefly talk about me. I'm the least important person here. My name is Mike Black. I'm the CEO and managing partner of Page Black. And so my job is really, I run the company. I'm out here doing events, which is the blast. Let me talk about Page Black. What we do at Page Black is really take the guessing out of marketing. And what we see happen, and I'll tell you a brief story, is that I was talking to we had a potential client, and we put a proposal in front of him it was maybe $15,000. It was a small planning project, and we were going to help him figure out how to market his company. And unfortunately, he said no. And then he hired a cold calling company to help him to grow his business. He said, look, as soon as they get me more business, I will hire you because I know what you do is necessary. And unfortunately, he spent about 4 times our proposal price, and he didn't get anything out of it. And that's the idea, is that he guessed and hoped, and it didn't work. And so we want you to get away from guess and hope marketing. And the way we do that is we go out and build a custom plan for your company. So with that said, I am going to start off with my first question, and I'm going to lead off with Rick. Rick, what makes difficult decisions difficult?
Well, there are many different flavors of difficult decisions, but I would say that there are 2 main things that make decisions difficult. Number one, there are conflicting interests involved, and this could be conflicting interests between stakeholders of the decision, or between your business goals. You might be, juggling whether you're going to be a growth company or an income company or it's a lifestyle company. There might be a combination of these different stakeholders. Maybe your partner has one goal. Maybe you have a different goal for your business. And is it a zero-sum game? And then the second thing that I think that really makes business decisions difficult is the risk involved. If it could be a financial risk, it could be a legal or a regulatory risk. It could be a political risk. So those are the 2 main things: conflicting interests and risks.
I'm going to have Don. What are your thoughts? And then as he was talking, I came up with my own. So I'll give my thoughts in just a minute.
Well, I think all those are very true. To come at it from a different way, I'll sort of put my psychologist hat on for a minute. I would say it's because we think they're difficult. You talked about life or death decisions. We get hung up on the consequences. Really, really bad things are going to happen if I get this wrong. Mm-hmm. And that may be true, but those things are going to happen whether we get our heads all wrapped around the axle or not. So it's all in our heads. Not to say that there aren't hard decisions. It's just that they become harder and harder with all that noise we have going on.
Okay, so you stole my thunder. I'm usually the psychology person in the background. Get to go say it's the emotional component too, and you just nailed it, which I agree with completely. So I'm going to move us because I think that's not where the meat of today is. Briefly, we have a quick, I guess, advertisement commercial. Next month, August 17th, Tuesday at 10 a.m. Mountain, we are going to be discussing on a webinar for Page Black, and we'll get you a link to that. We're going to talk about sales and marketing when they're not on the same page and it's hurting your revenue. What do we do? All right, that said, let's move into our next question. So, and it really comes to, and I'll be really curious to see, because you guys thought about what causes these decisions to be so difficult in different ways, but how should people approach, what's the best approach to taking on these difficult decisions? I personally have a panic attack and drink, but what do you guys suggest? Don, let me start with you. Sorry, I didn't call anybody out there.
Sure, no worries. Well, just tagging on what I just said. So what clients tell me as I slow down, I find more clarity and I make better decisions. And my add to that is as we get away from that noise, I run into people that they're trying to grow their business, or they're in some sort of a little, financial glitch of some kind. And you would think that it was just, the world was coming to an end. And I'll ask, well, are you going to go broke in the next 60 days? Well, no. So it's really not life or death much of the time. And so as we can get away from that noise, slow down, clear our minds, think about what the consequences really are, we get into a place from where we can make better, more thoughtful decisions.
I love how you presented that. I felt myself relax as you said, slow down and move through that. So thank you for that. That's brilliant. It reminds me, even maybe bigger perspective also, of like we've just been through a pandemic and a whole lot of us aren't here that used to be here. And, at the end of the day, we're all still here. So let's, maybe count your blessings. And what's that book in the 80s? It's Don't Sweat the Small Stuff, and it's all small stuff, which I've never read, but now I need to. So Rick, what's your response?
Well, I'm going to harken back briefly to, what my answer to the last question. I would say that, the first thing you need to do when you're approaching the decision is figure out who the stakeholders in the decision are. Figure out what their interests are, and make sure you understand that. Gather information, gather the facts, get whatever expert advice you need. And so this is a general answer, and sort of a general answer from my business experience as a general counsel and as a government affairs executive. But this is the same thing when I'm advising a business regarding a business dispute that they have. I'd also drill down just a little bit more, and this gets to the point about making sure you really understand your business and that you're getting whatever expert advice you need. And that is, you need to understand what duties you have. Who do you have a duty to? What is the duty? Do you have a fiduciary duty? Fiduciary duty is a duty of, extreme trust. And it's, more than just honesty. It's a deeper duty. Do you have a fiduciary duty? Are you doing what you need to do to satisfy the business judgment rule? And that is taking into account all of the information, et cetera. Do you have any statutory duties? Do you have any duties under your operating agreement or your business documents? So I would say, just in a deeper sense, who do you owe a duty to, if anyone, other than yourself? And what are those duties?
So Don says, slow down, get calm, and helped us all calm down when he did that. And then Rick, what you're providing is go deeper around getting perspective around what are the additional risks in some ways, because if you have a duty and you don't do that, that creates risk. you could actually be making a smaller problem, or maybe we're already talking about big problems, making a big problem bigger by not following some of those steps you just talked about. That's fantastic.
A lot of what I hear Rick saying is get all the information. I mean, the information that you really need to make the decision.
Right. And I hear talk to experts, because I wouldn't have thought of all that list myself. So it reaffirms my belief in hiring the good people and getting their advice when you need to. The other piece, and I'll be curious if you guys have a response to this, that for me, one of the pieces that I read this somewhere, and I wish I could tell you where, because they deserve credit, but it was this idea of, as you're setting the timeline to make a decision, look when your risk increases. Like you don't have to push yourself to make a decision right away, unless, like, when do you have to make this decision? And typically that's based on when your risk goes up. Any thoughts on that? It seems really smart to me, but I don't know.
Yeah, it's a good point. It sort of goes along with something that I've said a lot, that, avoidance only makes it worse. Avoidance never solves anything. And hard decisions are the easiest things in the world to avoid if one's not really paying attention.
That's right. Yeah. All right. I am going to go. Rick, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to add that you can't foresee every difficult decision that you're going to face. And, difficult decisions can come up in the context of a merger, or if you're, getting a new partner, and, or bringing in investors. So, when you're doing that, that's a great time to think forward about what things might produce a conflict. But I'll just give a little example of something. When I was general counsel of AT&T Broadband, which was a newly merged company of 3 companies, 2 cable companies and the telephone company. Something that was maybe not foreseeable, which was programming decisions. The cable companies had different approaches to programming, and they had crossed certain Rubicons that AT&T perhaps wasn't quite there yet as this older, very staid company. And so we early on faced kind of a surprise decision-making event around programming, and what were the political ramifications? What were ramifications with shareholders? What were ramifications between the merged companies? There were different approaches to this. So it might have been somewhat foreseeable, but not totally foreseeable. And it was a product of a very complicated merging of companies. But this is something that can arise even if you have a small business or a medium-sized business where you're bringing in partners who have, or investors or directors who have different views on what the business should be, on what their values are, et cetera. So I think the answer to that is do as much thinking up front as you can about that, and planning for how you're going to deal with those decisions when they come about.
And this isn't a pitch for you, because I know you don't do this, but it is really a thought of, if you don't have a good operating agreement in place, get one, because that, we hired an attorney to write ours, and there were so many things in there. I'm like, why is this there? And they told me, well, this is what can happen if you don't have that. And there's just a lot of, if you have somebody that has experience, you're going to get a lot of value out of that.
Yeah, I litigate the operating agreements that have defects in them.
That's what I was just going to say. And that helps you avoid fighting Rick, which I never want to fight Rick. All right, very good. So then I'm going to change this question slightly on the fly, because it hit me that there's 2 sides to this question. And the first part of this question is when and how do you involve your team, right? If you're a leader, there's a point where you probably need to bring your team in and help you make the decision or move forward. How do we do that? But also, maybe there's another side to this, that when and how do you not, or actually when do you not involve your team is probably a better way to put that. So let's go with that. And I'll lead with Rick on this one, and then we'll go right to Don.
Well, I'll make my answer to this one short, since I took a lot of time with the last one. My answer to that is involve your team early and often as part of that information gathering task. You want to get as much information as you can. And also, it helps later with, getting buy-in to involve them early and often. Sorry,
Okay.
my
email's blowing
computer's
up.
dinging here. Sorry about that. But yeah, early and often is my answer.
Okay. And then that's really from that perspective. I like that perspective from everybody has a different viewpoint, and if you sit in it on your own, you're going to miss a viewpoint that there's probably viewpoints and perspectives that you're going to miss. And so that'll give you more information. Don, what are your thoughts?
Well, I always come back to the same thing, the conversations that we're having with ourselves. Most people are secretive to some degree. Most people don't really like to be vulnerable. A lot of us just want to, carry the weight on our shoulders, and we got to be the strong ones. And it's weakness as we involve others, which is back to what I call noise, the conversations that we're having with ourselves. And I think that the more we can just get all of that noise out of the way, and just imagine just being able to get really, really clear and just literally sitting in your desk and just let all of that go in the face of some tough decision coming up, and just asking, well, yeah, who should I bring into this loop? What would be in the best interest of everybody, and getting to the best solution? And instead of focusing for a minute, instead of focusing on what the decision is, let's focus on what would my next step be relative to the involvement of my team? What's the optimum, and how can I go about that communication? And then to be able to communicate with them, part of your question is, well, how do you do that? Same thing, from that slowed down, clear place, and to be able to share, but then also receive back. And what I find is the Ds, the CEOs, the hard chargers of the world, they think they're involving their team when they sit down and they've already made up, in their heads what the answers are, and they're sort of, they're asking their team, but they're really telling their team. And maybe if somebody like grabs a 2x4 and hits them in the head, they get the information that's coming back, but maybe not. And so I'm suggesting just a whole other, just let them be heard like they've never been heard before as you engage them in this conversation.
I think that's a really great point, Don. And I think that comes up a lot of times when you have a business that's in a growth situation where the founder, is, now has a team that the founder needs to involve in decision making. And I think it's very big risk, as you say, that they'll pose in a question the answer they've already made, and instead of getting the involvement of their team. And I think that this is one of the big challenges of a business that's growing, that has a founder who is still running the business. How do you make that transition?
Right. If you think about that journey for the founder of that company, there was a day when they had, not only did they not have anybody to turn to do anything else, they also had to make all the hard decisions. They all had to do all the hard work. That transition to having a team is difficult. We probably need to hire a coach for that. But I think that's not a small mindset shift.
It's a big mindset shift.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did you have a comment on that, or I have a question for you?
No, go ahead. Go with the question.
So what if you're I think I don't know that the type D CEO is going to struggle with this much, but what if you are a leader, but you're also, when you find yourself, you're trying to switch into kind of decision-making mode, maybe you're going to write out a list of questions and bring that to your team. You get caught back up into a loop of what are the consequences of the decision. Your heart starts racing again. What are some tricks for CEOs or people to get out of that loop and into a better frame of mind, slow down like you did with us earlier, when they don't have you on the call? What are some tricks for them?
Yeah. So let me back up a little bit and give you a little tool set that I think is a really, really good one for anybody trying to make a decision, anybody trying to run a business. And that's just the idea of thinking time. So imagine if I'm the kind of guy that's got a decision to make, but I'm a little caught up in the noise. I don't quite know what to do next or who to involve. I'm confused. And believe me, a lot of smart people and people with big balance sheets and big companies, et cetera, are very confused on certain topics. So the idea of thinking time would be, I'm going to block an hour, maybe I can get a good 45 minutes in, and maybe I'll spend the first 45 minutes just thinking about what are the questions I need to ask. What are the questions behind the questions without trying to get to any answers? We just spend the whole hour or the whole 45 minutes just asking more questions. Really a lot to what Rick started off with earlier tonight or today. And just pull all of that out. And as I learn to do those kinds of things, to slow down, to get out of the noise, to get comfortable with just pulling all the pieces out and get them out on the table in front of me, now I am more empowered and more confident in my ability to go and sit with others and ask them for their input and their involvement and all of those things.
Right. So the more that it's on paper in front of you, the more empowered you are, is what I hear you saying.
Yeah, that's a lot of it. Yes, but it's really giving yourself a little process, a little space to pull out the things that go onto the paper.
I think that's really great too, because, and you alluded to this, when you've done the thinking time and you've identified the questions that you have and broken those down, then you can take those questions to particular people on your team and start to gather the information. And that's a great way to use the team to get answers to particular things that are confusing you or questions that you have.
Yeah. And now let me jump in with the problem with the thinking time. What people will try to do in their 45 minutes is they'll think of the question and they'll get all hung up on what are the answers, what are the steps. So I'm suggesting give yourself permission to not come up with a single solitary answer and only think about, well, what's the question behind the question? What's the next question? If there might be these consequences, then what would be 5 other questions behind those consequences? Now there's really something to work with.
Right. And if you catch yourself, this is my little input on this, is that when you catch yourself, either A, you're moving into answer mode, just you're going to. It's not, at least in my experience, that's what you do. And you just need to catch yourself and get yourself, okay, wait, I'm back on, I need to be in question mode or thinking time mode. And it's the same if you start to just really kind of go back into kind of like, oh my God, the world's falling apart, I'm going to get fired or whatever that is. Okay, that's fine. Put it aside. Let's get back to questions. Yeah. And that's my little tip for that. So, all right. So let me give you guys another scenario. We've done this right. We followed Don's advice. When we got panicked, we had a little recording of Don saying, slow down, so that we could slow down. We wrote down all the questions and we had all these questions and we brought them to our team. We've had this discussion and now the answers are contentious. There's disagreement in the team about how to solve the problem. What do we do? And Don, I'm going to give you the hot seat on this one.
Well, geez, I only have one answer. I just say it over and over. but it's really the same thing. Think about it. So we're trying to make a decision and we've got a lot of disagreement, and how are you going to get people to come together? And I know I'm a broken record, but it's the same thing. It's slowing down. It's really listening. The problem is that slowing down is really hard for people, right? They want to go and finish a thing in a meeting or a couple of meetings. So let me do 2 1-hour meetings. Well, it may take 10 45-minute meetings, but to really, really slow it down and just give everybody a chance to be heard and get everybody's sort of head and heart in the right direction, which is towards coming up with good solutions and good steps, not thinking about ego things and this guy's getting ahead of me and I'm my idea is better. And if we can just as a leader, communicate with the team in a way that will just let that go even a little. It will really, really help everybody's ability to communicate and move forward together.
So Don, if you have somebody on the team, you're facilitating this meeting and there are two people and clearly it's an ego thing. How do you stop that?
Just take them out behind the woodshed. No, look, it's not like you're going to change people's fundamental personalities, in a meeting, right? But modeling, in my experience, if I can be on my game with somebody, if I can be sort of like I feel now, then the biggest asshole in the world is probably going to slow down a little herself or himself. It's just as we show up that way, everybody else is going to some degree, come that direction. And if we have to, call somebody out, we got to call them out. Now, again, where am I coming from? If I'm coming from, this, rude SOB, then, my emotions are going to communicate about 100 times more than my words. And now I've got noise in the room it's going to impact that person and me, and the whole group's going to experience it. If somebody else is being a little overbearing or not listening, and I'm totally good inside, and my words are riding on that energy, then that's going to more likely cause that person to back up a little bit, to diffuse a little bit, and everybody in the room they're going to experience that. And that's the difference, I believe, between really, really effective leadership and kind of trying to fight through it the hard way.
So I'm hearing you really say the first step is to get your own ego into check and come into this in a kind of, you need to do that slow down process before the meeting, make sure your head's in the right space. And then as it goes about, if people are getting their ego on, it's so much easier and more effective for you to intervene and say, look, it seems like you're not coming to this from the right direction, or I'm a little bit confused. Help me understand that kind of approach.
Yeah.
All right. Very good. Rick, what do you think?
Well, I think there's two ways of looking at this question too. One is, the leadership sense. You've done all the things about consulting the various stakeholders, whether they're your team or they're outside stakeholders or a board of directors you may have. You've done all the consulting, and you've put this information, gathered the information, consulted experts, and you've put all this together and you make your decision. And the second part of that then is that you communicate your decision well to those stakeholders so that they understand the decision. And if they're part of the implementation of it, they understand clearly what the decision was. If there are outside stakeholders who may be upset or irritated about the decision, maybe it's regulators or maybe it's political constituents, that you can explain it to them in the best way that you possibly can. So, and then the second part of this is that going back to that operating agreement, that there's clear sort of rules of decision making in your business, so that you either avoid a 50-50 kind of decision making, or you've got a tiebreaker. So it's understood at the end of the day, after you've done all the things and exercised your leadership, that the buck stops here, and everyone understands the buck stops here. So that decision, is not contested because it's unclear lines of authority, unclear who actually makes the decision.
That's brilliant. I'm at a loss for words slightly, but that does not happen very often. I appreciate having both of you because you bring such a very different perspective to the challenge, and that's my goal in these. So that's just a quick thank you for doing that. I guess my thought is this is why you invest in culture and building culture way before you have a decision. If you've done that right, all of this is going to be easier. It's going to be easier to get people to calm down. It's more like, even if you have a 50-50 agreement, and dear Lord, don't do that. it's going to be easier for you to resolve it just using your culture and the conversations. But if you have a 50-50 agreement, don't do that.
Hey, Mike, can I jump in with a couple?
Absolutely. Go ahead.
You know what? Something I think I heard Rick saying, and I definitely just heard you saying, which is it's a whole lot better to deal with a problem before it becomes a problem.
Yeah.
So all those things we can do ahead of time to be clear on what our decision-making process is. We're just ahead of the game, right? The other thing I wanted to jump in with is that, you know, I talk a lot about the sort of the touchy-feely stuff, like how important it is to be in a good place inside. And I never want that to come across as weak or like I'm not the leader. But in my experience it's just the opposite. The more I'm out of my own way and slowed down, the stronger I am. But I just never want anybody to get the idea that this guy is saying that, you know, I got to be kind of like a weak, fluffy leader. That's not it at all.
Yeah, I didn't take that, and what I'm hearing your advice is essentially, even though you're using a softer touch, don't take that to be that means you're going to appease everybody in your team and that you're not the final decision maker. You still are. Yeah. I would never think that, Don, because earlier you just talked about hitting someone with a 2x4. That doesn't go together with a weak leader. But that said,
but I would have done it with love.
That's right. You're gonna hit them softly. All right. A quick commercial for our next event. This is next Thursday. We have another LinkedIn Live panel. We are going to be talking about how marketing is changing, and it is changing. So we have a variety of experts signed up for this from a company that supports really large companies going global. So we'll get an international perspective to this, to somebody who does business development, sales into large companies, as well as our own team. So that's going to be a fun event. It'll be this time next week. And we have our second to last question now, and that is, when do you involve outside experts? Maybe it's a lawyer, maybe it's an accountant, government affairs, public relations, or marketing. Yes, we want the marketing people to be involved. I say that from pure greed. No, really, it actually does make a difference, because all of those different professions will give you a different perspective. I guess my question is, have we answered that already? Are there points that we haven't? We talked a little bit about when to bring people in. What do you think, Rick? When would you, as an attorney, when do you want to be brought in?
Well, I would, as an attorney, I would like to be brought in early rather than later, before the problem gets really, really hard. I mean, there are a lot of, say there's a dispute between partners or members of a company, many times that can be resolved early on before it becomes a real intractable dispute or a litigation, if there's a kind of early intervention and some common sense advice from a lawyer or a mediator early on. So I would prefer to be brought in early. If it's already blossomed into into something that's going to litigation, the same thing, I would want to be brought in early on, so that I can plan it. And, you might have a dispute. I'll go back to this idea of, companies coming together. And I just saw a post about this today too, that you can have a clash between, or you can have a problem, you can inherit the vendor problem when you have a merger or new partners. You can inherit a vendor problem. Well, the time to deal with that is right away. What are you going to do about that? Are you going to try to renegotiate your contract with the vendor? Are you going to have to litigate to try to resolve this dispute that's about to blow up, or that's going to make it impossible for your new company to function, because maybe the costs are too much of the contract or whatever, or it's inconsistent with your goals. So I just would say, once again, bring the lawyers in, whatever kind, a good business advisor in early on. And, Mike and Don, you can answer better about some of the other disciplines, the marketing and the PR and everything. But my general sense is the earlier the better for everyone.
I think that's true, and I think people hesitate because they, obviously we all want to avoid incurring cost, but and it's that fine-tuned point. It's really figuring out when is the risk going up and when do I need to get ahead of that? Because the more you're ahead of that, the better off you are. Don, what's your answer?
Well, it's much the same. Figure out what you need and get them in there. Don't hesitate. And we do worry about costs, and I get it. Sometimes costs are important. I get it.
Mm-hmm.
But I see, 60-year-old CEOs that have the same conversation with themselves around money that they had when they were 20 and broke. And, rather than spending 30 grand to get some really, really good advice on something that's really, really important, they just don't.
Right.
And they don't even realize they're making a stupid decision.
Yeah.
It makes no sense at all. I had a guy recently, and we were talking about spending about $50,000, and I said, so let me get this straight. So when you die, each of your sons could either have 25 million each, or they could have 25 million plus a few thousand. And you're going to make a decision on that basis. So he laughs, he gets it.
True to Don's nature, straight spoken. I would just say, yeah, if it's a $30,000 cost to fix a $5 million problem or a $25 million problem, it's a no brainer, but we can get caught up in that. I mean, I think especially it's that mindset. If you started off as a small company, you built it up as a small company. Sometimes it's hard to let go of the way that you did business when you were smaller, and that was too big of a bill, perhaps. All right. I am going to close this off. I have an additional question. And so it's going to be each of you, and I'll start with you, Rick. And the question is, if you're talking to somebody they've just had this big, they're in the shock mode or whatever, they're just over the shock mode and they're just starting to make this really difficult question. What's the one most important thing for them to do?
So they haven't made their decision yet. They've just been confronted.
Yep, they've just been confronted that they have this really hard decision to make. What's the most important thing they need to do? That's kind of the walk away point for people to remember. Something's happened. Now I need to do what Rick said. What is that?
Okay, well, I think, the very, very first thing, I'm going to actually give you two answers, but the very, very first thing to do is have that thinking time that Don discussed. And then the second thing to do is hopefully you have a trusted advisor of some sort, whether it's a partner or a number two in the firm, an outside person that you rely on to sit down and kind of go over, what you came up with in your initial thinking time too, to see if you're on the right track or if you're missing something. So having that trusted advisor, I think, is a good second step.
All right. So Don, now that Rick has stolen your answer, you can either give the same one, which it may be, or what's your advice?
I'm going to log out. Much the same. I always say you can't solve a problem from inside the problem. So along with slowing down is just getting a little distance, getting rid of the noise, clearing the head, thinking about what the consequences really are, and just stepping back a little bit. That's always going to be the most important thing you can do.
All right. So both of you, to some degree, say get perspective, or give yourself perspective. All right. Very good. All right, folks, that is it for today. Thank you so much. I hope you learned something. I certainly did. And we will see you next week. I hope you join us for our discussion on marketing.
Thank you, Mike.